What is going on, everyone? Griffin here, coming at you with a first impressions video for a brand new game that just released on Steam called Iron Dungeon. So let's head over, let's talk about it. So Iron Dungeon is a twin-stick 2D platformer with roguelite elements. It was developed by R_Games, and it was also published by Meridian 4 and also R_Games. In Iron Dungeon, you will be exploring a dangerous underground complex in search of dozens of weapons, gadgets, and upgrades to find your way to the surface and find out if there is still life on Earth. So the basic gameplay loop for Iron Dungeon is you're going to load into the game, get your weapon, get a perk to start out with, some type of perk and a gadget, things like that. And you are going to drop into a level. So the levels are kind of structured on a one-by-one basis. It's procedural generated levels, but it's not like a continuous level system, kind of like the way that like Dead Souls and like Enter the Gungeon and things like that are. You have one screen and you drop into that screen and you have objectives to do on that screen, like unlocking different gadgets, unlocking different perks, unlocking different weapons, and also finding the door that allows you to progress to the next level. As you can see on the top left hand side of the screen here, you do have the current gadget that you have equipped and the button that gadget is currently associated with. Also, you have your heart containers, which represents your HP that you currently have. Below that, you do have batteries. These batteries are going to represent normally how many charges that you have for your specific gadget that you have equipped. In the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you do have your overheat bar, is what I'm going to call it, for the specific weapon that you are currently using. The more that you fire this weapon, the more that it will cause that bar to tick down. And once you get all the way to the end of the bar, then it is going to fire a lot slower and have other various properties depending on what type of weapon it is. In the top right hand corner here, you do see the ticket system. At least that's what I'm calling it. That is basically going to be the currency that you have access to while you are playing the game. Whenever you destroy enemies, whenever you do various things, they will drop these little yellow, like rectangle looking things, and you're able to pick those things up. Those will be your currency, and you will use that currency whenever you move from one level to another. So whenever you find the exit door and you go through that exit door, it takes you to like a middle area, like a middle screen, like an intermission screen, if you want to call it that. And in that intermission screen, you can buy various upgrades for your character, such as increasing the weapon damage, increasing like gadget damage or possible gadget uses and things like that. You can upgrade your health in that screen. You can also purchase health back and also charges back for the gadgets that you have access to. You also have a dash ability that allows you to reach areas that you can't normally jump to. You can also use this dash ability to dash through bullets that are incoming. So it's kind of like the roll mechanic or the dodge roll mechanic from Enter the Gungeon. Since it's on a 2D plane, it allows you to actually dash completely through the bullet that is coming towards you. Lastly, you have access to a melee weapon. You can use this melee weapon whenever you get close to enemies and you can attack them with the melee weapon. It's like a sword or a lightsaber equivalency, however you want to look at it. When you run into the enemies, they do not damage you until they actually shoot you. So you can run through the enemies, you can run up next to them and melee them. You don't have to worry about them running into you and causing damage, at least from a lot of the enemies that I encountered. Normally, I don't try to run into enemies just straight out of the gate because of like my history of playing various games, specifically something like Mario, where whenever you do run into a enemy, it will cause you to either, shrink down to basically lose a life, or it will kill you outright and you have to restart the map from that point forward. So whenever you drop into these levels, there will be various switches that are kind of like thrown throughout this particular room or this particular area that you're currently engaging in. And you can hit these switches and open up different areas. Also, they open up specific platforms and things like that that allow you to jump from one location to another to try to get to different perks and different areas of this overall area that you're currently engaging in. You have a red switch. Whenever you hit the red switches, there is a timer associated with it. Whenever you hit the green switches, it cuts it on and it stays on. There's certain perks that you have access to or gadgets that you have access to that whenever you run over red switches, it will turn them green and they will stay on indefinitely. Whenever you run over most of the switches or pick up anything in the game other than like the yellow currency that is dropped, it's normally going to spawn enemies in. So whenever you hit a switch that's on a timer, the best bet or the best course of action, at least that I've found, is to move through the area, destroy all the enemies, then go back to the switch, hit the switch, see what it actually opens up, because it doesn't really tell you what it opens up, and then kind of chart your course out to get to where you need to get to and to whatever area that it opens up, and then do a run, hit the switch, and make it to that final destination. So the switches basically act like a small puzzle that allows you to progress from one area to another. It also allows you to get upgrades to your weapons, possibly other weapons, other perks, other gadgets, and things like that. So what was my experience like playing Iron Dungeon? So I don't think it was a terrible experience right out of the gate. There's a couple of things that I did want to hit on here. It's a twin stick shooter. Now, I played this. I normally play a lot of games like shooter games and things like that. I will play them on mouse and keyboard. Whereas a lot of roguelite games or roguelite games, however you want to look at it, I play those on controller mostly. Dead Cells I play on controller. Enter the Gungeon I play on controller. So I went into Iron Dungeon playing it on controller as well. And the reason why is because it kind of warrants itself to this idea of like a classical, gaming aesthetic with like new modern ideas kind of thrown into it. And that's how I normally approach that. I wouldn't play Mario or Zelda with mouse and keyboard. I would play those with a controller. So why would I play something that is more akin to like Contra or Metroid with a mouse and keyboard when I can play it with a controller? That's where it feels like the first problem actually comes in. Because of games that I've played in my past, playing Metroid, playing Mario, playing Contra, playing Metal Slug, things like that. There's a very specific mindset that was ingrained in me from a very, very young age, and it kind of reflects on how I play specific games. So when I play side scrollers, I play them very specific because I have all of that past experience. Games like Contra, games like Metal Slug, you have a full 360 degree shooting area around the particular characters, but you don't have a twin stick shooter aesthetic attached to it. And I think that that's one of the biggest downfalls, in my opinion, for Iron Dungeon specifically, is because it is a twin stick shooter. You do get caught into these situations to where an enemy is like holding a cliff, or an enemy is like pushing towards a cliff, and you try to jump and like shoot at that enemy. But since it's a twin stick shooter, then you have a weird timing dynamic and also a weird crosshair placement that's associated with that kind of like drags down the experience a little bit, in my opinion. A lot of roguelikes and a lot of classic games, a lot of games that are being designed with that classic idea and that classic aesthetic, warrants itself to a very fast-paced gameplay style. Dead Cells is very fast-paced, Enter the Gungeon is very fast-paced, and any classic games that you get into is going to feel very fast-paced because that is how you have to approach these. With a 2D platformer twin stick shooter, it feels like that drags down that fast-paced nature of it. Now, I know that you can get in there and you can dash through bullets whenever you run into enemies, that you don't take any damage and things like that. But after playing games for as long as I have and having these things instilled in you from a very young age, it's hard to work around that logic. At least it has been for me. And once I started understanding that, like, okay, I can run into the enemies, I can melee the enemies as long as I don't get hit by their bullets, then I'm fine. Everything is really, really, everything flows very smoothly in that moment. It's just overcoming that initial, design logic that is just inserted into children's head whenever you're growing up in the time period that I grew up in. So would I think that it would fare better as like a more traditional side-scrolling shooter? I personally think that it would. I think that if the developer went back into the game and decided to take that twin stick shooter element out of it and start looking at other ways to incorporate shooting mechanics into the game, like Metroid. Metroid has, a full 360 degree area of shooting, and you use the triggers in order to shoot diagonally. You press up on the D-pad to shoot up. You press down on the D-pad to shoot down. You can jump and shoot down. I think that that idea and that identity will lend itself more to something like Iron Dungeon as opposed to this twin stick shooter element. Another big issue that I have, and this is an issue that I have with like roguelites and roguelikes overall, is the fact that some have carryover progression, some don't. And I feel like that this game would be very, very interesting if they could work in some type of a mechanic or some type of a way to have carry over progression happen, whether you're carrying your tickets over or your currency, whether you're carrying like the things that you've collected like your HP containers or your charges or cells that you have for your gadgets and things like that. I think that if there was some type, like just one thing that was a carryover mechanic from run to run, then it wouldn't feel so much like a drag whenever you do take that death shot that you're having to completely restart from the ground up. I know every time that you reload, you get a new weapon, you also get a new perk, and you also get like a new gadget, and that's good and great, but like every single level has new perks, every single level has new gadgets, not every single level, but a lot of levels have new weapons included in them as well. So you're not really gaining a ton of stuff there, even though you're having to do these weird puzzles to access those things during the levels. So if you had some type of carryover progression, some way to like level your character up by using that currency that you pick up, instead of like using it as ways to upgrade your character in the moment, it should be ways to upgrade your character overall. That way you're continuously getting stronger, especially in a procedural generated type of environment. Like that's the difference between classic game design aesthetics and current game design aesthetics, is with something that is procedurally generated every single time that you play it, then you need something that allows you to get in there and be successful in those earlier parts of those stages, because you know the enemies that you're going to be fighting against, but you don't know the layout. Whenever you played stuff like Metroid or Metal Slug back in the day, you had to memorize the levels, you had to memorize the enemy attack patterns, you had to memorize everything, and that really warranted itself to replayability because you were constantly learning. In Contra, you were constantly learning the attack patterns and the way that enemies actually pursued you, and how bullets and weapons and things like that within the game itself worked. Once you start memorizing these ideas and these patterns, it allowed you to become more and more successful as you got further and further into the game. You may make it halfway through the game in one swoop, but you learned something through that one run that you just did, and that you're going to be able to apply that logic to consecutive runs. In something procedurally generated, you don't have access to that. And because you don't have access to that, you need something that allows you to excel whenever you are dropping into it for the first time. There is a fantastic variation of weapons and perks that you have access to. A lot of the weapons are kind of hit and miss for me, specifically like the RPG. There's a lot of cool weapons that have a lot of different design aesthetics to them, and a lot of things that I really like. A lot of ricochets, a lot of lobbing shots, a lot of things like that adds different ways to play the game and different ways to approach specific situations. Since it is a twin stick shooter, you get into the downfalls of that too, where if you're not standing in the right place and you're trying to shoot from one level down to another level, you're going to hit the ground, you're going to take damage from the RPG. Once you take 3 RPG self damage, you're dead. And that's something that continuously happened to me in the game. Luckily, it was just the RPG and it's not your own shots, just in general, because there's a lot of ricochet weapons in the game. So if you could only imagine getting ricochet hit every single time that you shoot the weapon, that's going to make you not want to use that weapon and not, continue to ricochet all over the place. Luckily, that was considered whenever they were designing everything. Some of the perks are great, but a lot of them feel like that they should be quality of life updates for the game itself. Being able to paint the switches to turn a red switch green and keep it on permanently should just be a thing that happens, in my opinion. I know that there's like certain areas, and a lot of games do stuff like that, where you hit a switch, there's a timer, and whenever that timer's up, then whatever it is that you're trying to access goes away. And you get one shot at it, and that's it. Every single red switch that I encountered, it spawned enemies. it drove me insane because 9 times out of 10, you're going to take a shot because you're trying to line your shots up with where the enemy spawned into. Then you have to go through and clear everything, and then you have to go back and hit the switch after you charted your path out. Just make the red switches or time switches give you something super cool and super interesting and very difficult to get, whereas everything else is a green switch. Whenever you finally get to it and you hit the green switch, it's open for the rest of the game. It feels weird. With the magnet perk, that allows you to basically magnetize all of the currency that is dropped. It's something that slightly exists in the game, but it doesn't exist to the same degree as the magnetism perk that you pick up. To me, that should just be quality of life update. They should increase the magnetism at base and get rid of that perk completely. There's a lot of perks in the game that do stuff like that. And also, I feel like they're missing a huge way of approaching the game to where not only you have access to all these different unique weapons, but why can't we have access to different unique melee weapons as well? I mean, there's perks that allow you to do more damage when you swing them faster and things like that, and that's all good and great, but it would be cool to mix that aesthetic where it's primarily a shooter game with some melee things thrown in here and there, and you can pick up different melee weapons that allow you to do different things. Maybe even stuff where when you time it right and you hit the bullets, and that may be a perk. When you hit the bullets, it hits them back at the enemy or whatever. That may be a perk. I'm not 100% certain. I didn't get all the perks by any stretch of the imagination, of course. But, if you got a weapon that allowed you to do that did a little bit more damage, or that allowed you to swing a little bit faster, then that's a cool thing that you're going to keep in the back of your mind, as opposed to, oh, I picked up this perk real quick because as soon as I pick the perk up, I'm getting shot by 14 different directions. It's just something that could be fleshed out in a quality of life type of way. Last thing I wanted to hit on here was the overheat on the weapons. Doesn't feel the greatest. If they would have included some type of reload mechanic into the game, and have some weapons on a charge-based system where whenever it starts to overheat, then it has the similar effect that it does currently in the game, but also having weapons that you have access to that also have a reload mechanic would not be a terrible thing by any stretch of the imagination. It would allow you to manage your downtime better, as opposed to trying to take these pop shots at people and normally getting caught in situations that you don't necessarily want to be in, where you have enemies that spawn all around you. You're trying to line the shots up to deal with the most concerning threat to begin with. By the time you get that enemy destroyed, you're out of charge for the weapon, so you have to let the overheat take control of it so that you can fire faster to destroy the enemy faster, but the enemies are all shooting at you and they're actively moving at you. It just creates this weird, inconsistent gameplay experience that just feels bad. Almost every single thing that you pick up or every switch that you hit, you're almost always going to take damage. Luckily, enemies are very gracious, and they're not only their spawn rate is super high, but also their drop rate of items is super high. So you do pick up HP and things like that from destroying enemies that allow you to survive a lot longer within the game. But it just feels bad that you're almost always going to take a hit whenever you are touching something or picking something up. It just doesn't feel the greatest in the world. And then also trying to line shots up, because the twin stick shooter thing makes it feel just as bad, because by the time you destroy one enemy, you either have to manage your downtime with the overcharge thing, or you have to just attack the enemy with what you have and hope that you can destroy the enemy before you take as many shots. You can only dash so far. And I know that you can run into the enemies and run through them and you don't take damage, but it's hard to recognize that. It's hard to understand that whenever you have 30 plus years of gameplay experience where when you touch enemies, bad things happen. I did have one boss fight during my encounter, and the boss fight was very well done. I enjoyed the boss fight quite a bit. I thought, there could be a little bit more variation. I know they don't want to go full bullet hell with it, but I do feel like spawning enemies during a boss fight doesn't feel great. It feels very aggravating, because not only are you having to worry about the actual boss itself and its movement pattern and the things that it's doing, now you have a bunch of things that spawn in the ground, and a lot of things that spawn on the ground are things like that shoot acid at you, that linger in pools, that's really hard to see because of all this stuff laying on the ground. So hopefully if there's other bosses within the game, they kind of, get rid of that idea just a little bit, move away from the spawning enemy trope, and just add more variations and more ways of encountering these boss fights. Overall, it is not a terrible game by any stretch of the imagination. I do like the layout of the levels. I do like the aesthetic. I do like the design of everything. I think that a lot of the weapons are really cool and interesting. A lot of the perks are really cool and interesting, and the gadgets are really, really neat to mess around with as well. There's some bad things. There's some good things. Overall, it's not a terrible game, and it's definitely worth trying the demo out. And if you enjoy the demo, be sure to pick up the full game over on Steam. Also, in the description, there will be a link directly to their Steam page. So if you are interested in trying this game out for yourself, please feel free to. Be sure to drop a comment down below if you have tried it out. Let me know what you think about it. And also let me know what you would rate it out of a scale of like 1 to 10. Where would you place Iron Dungeon, scale of 1 to 10? Be sure to let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't already, please be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. If you want more content like this, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. This is something new and fresh that I'm trying out. So if you do enjoy this type of video, please feel free to let me know in the comments down below. Lastly, for those of you that are unaware, I do stream on Thursdays and Sundays. So if you are interested and available, please feel free to stop by and say hello there. Thanks for watching, guys.